To the poor families of Pennsylvania in the 1830s, Rosewood was a lifeline, a place of hope, a miracle. Immigrant parents, Irish, Polish, German, who had lost jobs in mines or factories, who couldn't afford to feed their children, were told by church officials, "Take them to Rosewood. There they'll be cared for. They'll eat. They'll have a future." And so on cold mornings, wagons lined the muddy road outside the gates. Mothers kissed their babies one last time. Fathers left silent, their eyes wet, their pride broken. The children, barely old enough to understand, looked up at the towering building, its cross glinting in the weak sun, and thought they were being given a second chance. Inside, a woman waited. Her name was Mother Agnes Holloway, the matron of Rosewood. Tall, thin, her black dress pressed perfectly, her silver crucifix shining on her chest. To outsiders, she looked like a savior, a woman dedicating her life to abandoned children. Newspapers praised her, calling her a saint of charity, but the children knew a different truth. The moment the doors shut, the warmth ended. Agnes's smile faded, the softness vanished, and the children were no longer sons or daughters. They were property. Rosewood was nothing like the parents imagined. Dormitories crammed with 30 children to a room, thin mattresses stuffed with straw, the air reeking of mildew and urine. Food was scarce, a watery soup of potatoes and stale bread crusts. On good days, a slice of salted pork. Rules were strict. Speak without permission, and your knuckles were struck with a cane. Cry at night, and you'd be dragged from your bed, beaten with a leather strap, and forced to kneel on raw rice until your knees bled. The older children learned quickly. Silence kept you safe, but nothing kept you safe from the list. Every Sunday evening, after the children had been lined up for inspection, Mother Agnes walked the rows with her leather-bound ledger. Her finger, long and bony, would stop on certain children. A boy here, a girl there. She'd write their names slowly, carefully, as though sealing a fate. The chosen ones never lasted long. Within days they were gone. Some were said to be adopted, others sent to farms in need of labor. But the older children had seen enough to know the truth. They whispered of wagons that left only at night. They spoke of men in dark coats waiting at the back gate. And they heard, always at midnight, the muffled sounds coming from the basement. The basement of Rosewood was forbidden. A heavy wooden door reinforced with iron bolts. The children were warned. Any who approach will be punished. But sounds traveled through old walls. Some nights, when the wind was still, the children in the dormitories swore they could hear it. The clatter of metal instruments, faint screams smothered by thick stone, sometimes an odor, chemical, sour like burning, rose up through the floorboards. They knew what it meant. Mary, who slept in the corner bed, had been on the list. She was 9 years old with golden hair and a laugh that warmed the coldest mornings. One night her bed was empty. The next morning the girls asked, "Where's Mary?" Mother Agnes only said, "She's gone to a better place." But under the floorboards, hours later, the girls swore they heard her crying. By the mid-1840s, rumors spread through the town. Families noticed strange patterns. Children dropped off at Rosewood were never seen again. No letters arrived. No adoptions were confirmed. Still, desperate parents kept coming. Poverty left no choice, and besides, who would dare question the church? Rosewood remained a fortress of silence. But the children inside knew the truth. They knew that Rosewood wasn't a home. It wasn't salvation. It was a hunting ground, a place where the poorest, most vulnerable lives were gathered in one place, a place where those lives could be sold. And Rosewood's buyers weren't looking for sons and daughters. They were looking for subjects. The first time the children saw the men in black coats, they knew something was wrong. They didn't walk like priests. They didn't smile like donors. Their boots were polished, their faces pale, their hands gloved even in the heat of summer. They arrived in horse-drawn carriages without markings, slipping through the back gate when the town was asleep. The children called them the Crow Men, because of their long black coats, their sharp noses, their voices that cawed like ravens echoing in the halls. They came only for the names in Mother Agnes's ledger. It was always the same. After Sunday service, when the children's voices had barely faded from the chapel hymns, Agnes opened her book. "Stand straight," she hissed. One by one, her finger traced down the page. She'd stop, staring into a child's face as if measuring something invisible, a boy with broad shoulders, a girl with pale skin, a child with unusually bright eyes. Then the name was written, and everyone in line knew. That child had just been sold. No one said it aloud. No one dared. But every child in Rosewood understood that the ones who went into the basement never came back. One night, Thomas, a 12-year-old with sharp wits, was taken. The other boys watched as two crowmen led him through the forbidden basement door. The hinges groaned like a dying animal, then silence. Hours later, a sound drifted upward. Not a scream. Not exactly. It was a strangled cry, as if someone was trying to shout with a hand clamped over his mouth. Then the metallic clang of instruments, the hiss of boiling water, a low murmur of Latin prayers. The boys lay awake, trembling, clutching their thin blankets. By morning, Thomas's bed was empty. Mother Agnes told them he'd been adopted by a fine family in the South. But the older children had seen the stains on the crowmen's coats, rust-colored, damp, and they knew Thomas wasn't coming back. What were they doing in the basement? The whispers spread like disease through the dormitories. Some said the men were doctors, testing cures for cholera and typhus. Others believed they were searching for ways to change the human body itself, injecting strange liquids, cutting open flesh, sewing wounds shut just to see if they would heal. The truth was worse. Years later, when fragments of the Rosewood records were uncovered, investigators found references to something chilling: blood transfusions between children and animals, injection of mercury salts and arsenic to observe endurance, isolation of children in pitch-black rooms for weeks to study the effects on the mind. They weren't healing anyone. They weren't saving lives. They were experimenting, treating poor orphans like rats in a cage. Every once in a while, a child would return from the basement, but they were never the same. One boy named Elias came back after 3 days. His head was shaved. His arms were covered in strange burns. He didn't speak a word. He didn't eat. At night, he rocked back and forth, whispering to himself, staring at a place no one else could see. Within a week, he was gone again, taken by the crowmen, this time forever. Another girl, Clara, returned with her eyes bandaged. She stumbled in the dormitory, hands outstretched, searching for her bed. When the bandages were removed days later, her eyes were clouded white. She was blind. She died before the year ended. The other children began to understand the truth. Survival was not guaranteed. Being chosen didn't mean adoption. It meant mutilation, and if you came back at all, you came back broken. But outside the orphanage walls, Rosewood was praised. The local newspapers printed glowing reports about the charitable mission of Mother Agnes. Politicians posed for sketches in front of its towering gates. Donations poured in from wealthy families who believed they were helping the needy, and all the while children disappeared into the basement. The townsfolk asked no questions. Who would accuse the church? Who would dare challenge the saintly Agnes Holloway? Silence kept the town clean. Silence kept the money flowing. But inside the dormitories, silence was suffocating. Every creak of the basement door, every echo of boots in the hallway, every whisper of Agnes's ledger meant another child would vanish. By 1845, Rosewood housed nearly 200 children. Yet to the orphans inside, the walls felt like a prison. A maze of corridors leading only to hunger, pain, and disappearance. The younger ones asked, "When will we go home?" The older ones no longer answered, because they knew the truth. Rosewood wasn't a home, it was a marketplace, and the currency wasn't money, it was flesh. By the late 1840s, Rosewood Orphanage had become both a legend and a shadow. To the outside world, it was a beacon of charity. But inside, it was a graveyard of secrets, a place where children learned that silence was survival. Yet no matter how careful Mother Agnes and her doctors were, the truth always has a way of leaking out. It started small. Merchants in town whispered about wagons leaving the orphanage in the dead of night. Covered with tarps, heavy, always heading south. One butcher swore he saw a tiny pale hand slip from beneath the canvas before being yanked back inside. He told no one. He drank himself to sleep that night and every night after. By 1850, records showed over 300 children had been admitted into Rosewood. Only a fraction were ever officially adopted. Where had the rest gone? In 1851, a boy named Jonah escaped. He was 13, skin stretched thin over his bones, scars etched across his arms like maps. He stumbled into a nearby farm at dawn, delirious, raving about needles, knives, and the men with black eyes. When the farmer brought him to the sheriff, Jonah's story was dismissed as the wild imagination of a traumatized orphan. The sheriff even returned him to Rosewood. Jonah wasn't seen again, but the farmer's wife never forgot. She told her children, and they told theirs. Generations later, that story survived. In 1863, during the Civil War, Union troops occupied the county. While searching through abandoned estates, a young soldier found a cache of letters in a desk marked with the seal of Rosewood. The letters were correspondence between Mother Agnes and a group of physicians in New York. Their words were cold, clinical, stripped of any humanity. Subject A survived arsenic exposure for 7 days before succumbing. Subject B showed increased resistance. We request more children with robust lungs for further testing. Your efforts are invaluable to the advancement of medical science. The soldier kept them. After the war, he tried to expose what he'd found. But without names, without witnesses, his claims were buried. The papers vanished into dusty archives ignored for nearly a century. By the late 1860s, Rosewood's reputation began to rot. Too many families had come searching for adopted children who never arrived. Too many local workers had noticed the strange shipments leaving its gates, and then came the fire. In 1871, a blaze erupted in the west wing of the orphanage. Officially, the cause was faulty lanterns, but survivors told another story, that the fire had been set deliberately to destroy records, to erase evidence. Nearly 30 children perished in the flames. Their names were never released. Mother Agnes survived. The basement did too. Why didn't anyone stop it? Because the orphanage was profitable. Wealthy donors in New York and Philadelphia funneled money into Rosewood, believing they were funding Christian charity. The church used it as a symbol of its good works. Local officials looked the other way because they feared losing support. Everyone had something to gain by keeping silent, and the children had no one to speak for them. By the early 1900s, Rosewood closed its doors. Officially, it was due to financial troubles, but whispers claimed something darker, that too many skeletons had been discovered during renovations. Buried beneath the foundation, stacked like forgotten firewood, the church sold the land. The buildings crumbled. The basement was sealed, but the stories never died. Even today, locals claim to hear echoes if they stand near the ruins at night. Footsteps pacing the earth, the faint sound of children crying, the creak of the iron basement door swinging open. Some believe the spirits of Rosewood's victims never left. What makes Rosewood so chilling is not just what happened inside its walls, but how easily it was erased. No monuments, no plaques, no mention in the history books, just silence. Because if the truth were remembered, people would have to face what Rosewood really was. Not an orphanage, not a home, but a machine of cruelty, powered by children, fueled by greed, protected by silence. And the most terrifying thought of all, Rosewood wasn't the only one. It was simply the one that left behind the fewest survivors. Rosewood may have crumbled into the earth, its walls overtaken by vines and silence, but its shadow never vanished. Generations later, people still whisper about what happened there. And every few decades, something surfaces, an artifact, a document, a testimony that drags Rosewood's ghost back into the light. In 1957, a young woman named Eleanor Hayes was researching forgotten institutions of the 19th century for her dissertation. Deep in the county courthouse basement, she stumbled upon a locked file box. Inside were charred scraps of parchment, a donor ledger, and a half-burned journal. The journal contained brief, horrifying notes. Child 47, expired after injection. Sample taken from the lungs of subject B. Breathing labored but ongoing. Do not record names. Numbers only. Hayes published a small article in an academic journal, but it was quickly dismissed as exaggerated folklore. She died in a car accident 2 years later. The box vanished. To this day, conspiracy theorists ask, did she really die in an accident? Or was Rosewood's secret still being protected? In the 1980s, ghost hunters began visiting the ruins of Rosewood. What they reported was consistent, unnerving, and strangely specific, children's laughter echoing where no children stood, the metallic scrape of a basement door, cold spots near the stone foundation, where some claimed to hear whispers begging, "Please, don't take me." One investigator swore he saw dozens of pale faces peering at him from the dark before vanishing. He never returned. In 2004, construction workers digging near the old site unearthed several small bones. Experts confirmed they belonged to children. The county attempted a quiet reburial, but a forensic anthropologist who studied the remains noted something disturbing. Many of the bones bore signs of repeated fractures that had healed poorly, consistent with deliberate harm or experimentation. Even stranger, DNA testing suggested the children were not related to each other, yet their skeletal deformities were eerily similar, almost as if they had all been subjected to the same treatments. Today, genealogy groups in the region quietly track family trees that originate from lost children of the 19th century. A few families in Georgia and Alabama carry unusual traits: bright green eyes, copper-colored hair, rare genetic disorders. Some believe these are the legacies of Rosewood's experiments. When asked about their lineage, some older relatives simply shake their heads and whisper, "We don't talk about Rosewood." Local teens dare each other to visit the ruins at night. They say if you bring a toy and leave it near the foundation, you'll hear tiny hands dragging it into the darkness. Some claim to hear a woman's voice, harsh, commanding, chanting prayers in Latin, the way Mother Agnes once did before choosing her next subject. No matter how much the county tries to bury the story, it always resurfaces. Because legends, like wounds, never truly heal, the terrifying reality is this: Rosewood was not unique. Across America in the 1800s, there were dozens of institutions where vulnerable children were hidden away. Some vanished into adoption, some into poverty, and some into experiments no one ever documented. Rosewood is remembered only because fragments survived. How many others were erased completely? Rosewood Orphanage may be gone, but the deeper you dig, the more tangled the story becomes. What if I told you there are still sealed records, locked archives, and silent witnesses connected to Rosewood? Even today, historians trying to reconstruct Rosewood's history hit a frustrating wall. Official county records from the 1850s through the 1870s are strangely incomplete. Whole years are missing from census lists. Dozens of birth and death records show children transferred but give no destination. Some ledgers end mid-sentence, as if torn from the page. Even more suspicious, letters from church authorities referencing Mother Agnes were quietly removed from diocesan files in the 1920s. To this day, no one knows who took them or why. Black families in the region passed down the story of Rosewood in coded phrases, songs, prayers, and warnings to children not to wander near the ruins. One chilling lullaby, recorded in the 1930s, contained the line, "Don't let the sisters call your name, or you'll never wake again." What makes this more disturbing is that survivors' descendants claim their grandparents remembered being lined up, one by one, waiting to hear if Mother Agnes would call their name. If she did, they were never seen again. Between 1850 and 1870, dozens of children across the county were placed into homes through the orphanage system. But when genealogists try to trace those children, their paper trail vanishes. No marriages, no death certificates, no descendants, as if they simply ceased to exist. Some researchers believe these were the children sold off to medical colleges, where bodies could fetch a price for dissection and study. Others insist they were sent to hidden laboratories in larger cities. The truth? Still buried. A fragment of a ledger uncovered in 1978 included chilling notes beside initials. Sample delivered to Augusta College, 1863. Subject P transported north, 1865. Payment received, 14 $14. This strongly suggests that at least some Rosewood children weren't just experimented on within the orphanage, but sold across state lines for further study, which raises the darkest question of all. How many doctors, professors, and scientists knew about this and stayed silent? Local rumor claims that when Rosewood finally burned down in the late 19th century, a chest of documents was rescued from the flames. The chest, according to whispers, contained names, photographs, and medical drawings. Some say it was hidden by a priest who wanted to bury the shame. Others claim it was stolen by a family who profited from Rosewood and didn't want exposure. Wherever it is, that chest has never resurfaced. If it ever does, it might reveal just how many children were taken, sold, experimented on, and erased from history. The scariest part of this story isn't the orphanage itself. It's that we may only know the tip of the iceberg. Rosewood might be just one chapter in a much larger, hidden system where the poor, the orphaned, and the powerless were treated as disposable. And if we don't remember Rosewood, how many other stories like it have already been lost? Decades passed after the burning of Rosewood Orphanage. The building was gone, the ledgers destroyed, and the records erased. But what could not be erased were the memories of those who lived through it. And when the survivors finally began to speak, the world was forced to face horrors it had long tried to forget. Imagine an elderly man, frail, sitting in a wooden chair. His hands tremble as he speaks to a young reporter in the 1940s. His eyes wander as though staring into the corridors of his childhood. "I remember the smell of chalk and bleach," he whispers. "We were told we were special, chosen by God. But when the doctors came, children disappeared. I never saw my brother again, never." This was the first testimony that cracked the silence, and soon others followed. A woman in her 80s recalls being blindfolded and placed in a wagon. She was told she was being adopted. But the wagon never reached a family's home. It stopped at a clinic where she was left for months. "They said I was sick," she remembers. "But I wasn't. They made me sick." Another survivor, a man who became a preacher, described nights of fevers and endless injections. "We were experiments. I could feel it in my bones. They wanted to see how long we could suffer." One chilling testimony came from a woman who was only 6 at the time. "I was a twin. They took my sister first. The next morning her bed was empty. They told me she had been adopted. But I never saw her again. Never." These survivors carried trauma their whole lives. Some could not sleep in silence because it reminded them of the dormitories. Others would panic at the sight of medical instruments. Many refused to tell their own children about Rosewood, fearing the curse of its memory. One survivor confessed in a hushed voice, "We learned not to cry. Crying got you chosen faster." That single sentence captures the unimaginable fear that haunted these children. For decades, these voices were silenced, not by force, but by shame, fear, and disbelief. Who would believe that an orphanage run by nuns and funded by wealthy patrons could secretly sell children as experiments? And yet every survivor carried the same story. The vanishings, the experiments, the lies. Some of the most heartbreaking confessions came from those who lived, while others didn't. One elderly man said, "I always wondered, why me? Why did they let me go when so many never came back?" A woman broke down mid-interview whispering, "I see their faces. Even after all these years, I still hear them calling my name in the night." The testimonies never provided the full truth. Dates conflicted, memories blurred. But the consistency of fear, the patterns of disappearance, the presence of doctors, the whispered prayers, painted a picture too real to ignore. The question that haunted historians was this: if even half of these survivors' memories were true, what unspeakable horror had really taken place behind Rosewood's walls? And so the survivors spoke, not for justice, not for recognition, but so the children who vanished would not be forgotten. But if their stories were true, then the burning of Rosewood was not the end of the horror. It was only the beginning of a much darker cover-up. By the early 1900s, Rosewood Orphanage was a place whispered about in nearby towns. Children vanished, rumors spread, but no official records could prove anything. And then one night, the secrets of Rosewood went up in flames. But the question remains, was it an accident or an act of vengeance? It was a cold December evening, 1903. The children had just been sent to bed, their dormitories filled with whispers and the creak of old floorboards. Shortly after midnight, smoke began to curl from the western wing. Within minutes, flames leapt skyward, devouring the dry wooden walls like paper. Some said it began in the kitchen. Others swore they saw a man slipping through the orchard with a lantern. Whatever the cause, the orphanage was a furnace before dawn. Children woke to choking smoke, screams and the crash of beams collapsing. Nuns rushed frantically, some carrying the youngest in their arms. Doors were locked, and keys were missing. Some children clawed at windows. Others tried to hide under their beds. One survivor later said, "It wasn't the fire that scared me. It was the silence of the ones who didn't make it out." Villagers from the town 2 miles away claimed they could see the flames lighting up the sky. By the time they arrived, the structure was collapsing. Some swore they heard explosions inside, like chemicals igniting. Others believed they saw figures, doctors rushing to carts and carrying away boxes before the roof caved in. The smell, they said, wasn't just smoke. It was something far worse. The newspapers called it an accident. A tragic fire claims the lives of dozens of orphans. They published numbers that never matched the survivors' memories. Some said 23 dead, others said 47. But there were no burial records. No graves, only ashes. And just like that, Rosewood Orphanage disappeared from official history. Privately, whispers grew louder. Had a grieving parent set the fire after discovering what happened to their child? Had one of the nuns finally broken under guilt and struck the match herself? Or, most chilling of all, was the fire set by those running the experiments to erase the evidence once and for all? The land where Rosewood once stood was quickly sold, and a farmhouse built in its place. Local children dared each other to play near the ruins, claiming they could hear faint crying at night. Decades later, when the farmhouse was abandoned, explorers found charred toys buried under the soil. A tiny shoe, a scorched doll's head, a rusted bed frame. The fire did not end the mystery. It only deepened it. With the building gone, the records destroyed, and the bodies unaccounted for, Rosewood became something more than just a place. It became a ghost. A ghost that haunted every survivor, every whisper, every unanswered question. The fire consumed Rosewood Orphanage in a single night. But what it could not destroy were the memories of the children who lived there, and the dark suspicions that have lingered for over a century, because if Rosewood was truly erased, then why do its shadows still remain? The fire destroyed the orphanage, but it didn't destroy the truth. If anything, it forced those in power to bury it deeper. Within a week of the fire, government officials arrived on the land. They didn't search for survivors, they didn't recover remains. Instead, they removed crates of documents, hauling them away under guard. Locals who tried to ask questions were silenced. One man who spoke to a reporter was later found drowned in the nearby river. Survivors were quietly relocated, scattered across distant towns, renamed, their identities erased. The final investigation report? Just 3 pages. It called Rosewood a failed institution and closed the matter forever. But one line in the report stood out. All scientific materials have been secured. What scientific materials? And where did they go? Rosewood was said to have burned with all its children inside. But that's not the whole story. Survivors claimed not all the children perished in the fire. Some were loaded into wagons in the middle of the chaos and never seen again. Decades later, census records from other states showed strange anomalies. Clusters of children listed as orphans, all with the same birth year, all with no past. Whispers spread that these children were taken by private laboratories to continue the experiments elsewhere, hidden behind new walls and new names. One chilling rumor persisted in town. The fire wasn't the end. It was the transfer. Did the children of Rosewood actually die, or were they absorbed into something darker? Today, Rosewood is gone. But if you ask locals in that part of America, they'll tell you it never truly left, ghost. Hunters who explored the grounds in the 1970s claimed to hear children crying in the orchards where the wagons once rolled. A farmer who built on the land said he found old medical instruments buried beneath the soil, scalpels, syringes, bone saws, still stained with something dark. The farmhouse built after the orphanage was abandoned in the 1940s. Tenants reported waking up to the sound of footsteps in the hall, doors slamming and the smell of burning wood filling their bedrooms. But the most disturbing account came in 1998, when construction crews clearing the land uncovered a shallow grave. Inside were the skeletal remains of at least 12 children, small bones tangled together, never recorded, never buried properly. Rosewood's story isn't just about one orphanage, it's about what people are capable of hiding when no one is watching. The fire may have erased the building, but the shadows it cast are still with us. Some secrets refuse to stay buried. And maybe somewhere the children of Rosewood or their descendants are still out there, carrying the mark of America's forgotten horror.